December Community Day just wrapped up, which means all of the community days for Pokemon Go in 2023 are now in the books. So for this video, I wanted to take a look back at every single one of the community days that we had this year and give my own thoughts and opinions regarding all of them. Alright, so with that said, let's get right into it. Alright, how's it going everyone? It's me, it's Jinsula. I hope you're having a good day and welcome to today's Pokemon Go video. Alright, so the purposes of this video is to take a look back at every single community day that we had in the year 2023 and talk about the ones that were actually really good and also talk about the ones that were forgettable and why they were forgettable. I think there's a lot of positive lessons that Niantic can learn from this video, and I do want to provide a lot of good feedback because when it comes to 2024, that is going to be a year where they're going to be tested. And I really do hope that they knock it out of the park in the year 2024, especially with community days, because there's going to be a lot of players that are going to either quit the game or come back to the game. It's going to be a very pivotal year. But setting that aside, I really think all the community days in 2023 were actually pretty good, especially compared to previous years. And I really hope that in the year 2024, they match the amount of hype that we had from community days this year or make it even better. And I really do think they have the capabilities to do that. Right, so with all that said, let's go into each and every single one of the community days that we had in 2023. Starting off in the month of January, we of course had Chespin Community Day. Now on top of this Pokemon being a starter Pokemon, its evolved form Chestnut had a lot of implications within the Go Battle League once it received the move Frenzy Plant. I actually think this was one of the good community days that we had this year. There was a lot of gameplay implications and Chespin is a very popular Pokemon, so for it to get a community day was going to be really hype. Now, moving along, in the end of the month of January, we of course got a Community Day Classic for the Pokemon Larvitar. This is a community day that a lot of players wanted to make a return, specifically because when it comes to Larvitar's evolved form Tyranitar, that is a Pokemon that is relevant in both PvP as well as PvE. Of course, in PvP, it's really only going to be good for the Master League, but ever since it received the move Brutal Swing, this Pokemon actually shot up in relevance. So I actually do think that when it comes to this particular Community Day Classic, it was definitely welcomed by a lot of Pokemon Go players. I mean, it's basically the concept of Community Day Classics, right? Like, people who were not around for the original Community Day, they are able to relive it because of these Community Day Classic events, and I actually do think that's a good thing. I really like the fact that when it comes to Community Day Classics, they're picking the right Pokemon, but unfortunately for the year 2024, the first Community Day Classic is of course going to be featuring Porygon, and I really do not think anyone cares for that particular Pokemon, so I really hope they have better Community Day Classics coming down the pipeline. Like, it would be really cool if we had Beldum have a Community Day Classic. I think a lot of players have been asking for that one. But moving right along to February Community Day, we of course had Noibat. This was one of those community days that was forgettable. I don't think anyone actually cared about this Pokemon or its evolved version. The Community Day move that it received, Boom Burst, wasn't even going to make it any better. Considering that this Pokemon is a Dragon and Flying type Pokemon, Boom Burst is going to be just a generic move that's not going to make this Pokemon any better. So yeah, this was a very disappointing community day, but naturally, I don't think a lot of players would have cared for it anyway because February was a very stacked month this year. We had the Go Tour event and we had a lot of in-game events, so I think players wanted a low-pressure community day, and that is exactly what they got. But moving on to March, we of course had Slowpoke and Galarian Slowpoke in one community day, and this was actually a really good event in my opinion. Considering that both of these Pokemon combined have a plethora of different evolutions, you were very active during this particular community day. And yeah, there was a lot of gameplay implications behind these evolutions getting the move Surf, so I do think a lot of players actually cared about this particular community day, and it did actually end up becoming a lot of fun. Moving along to April, we had Togetic Community Day, and this was extremely interesting because I don't think anyone would have predicted that Togetic would be a Pokemon that would one day receive a community day. But yeah, it received one, and I thought it was a really good one. Because it's a pre-evolved form, I think a lot of players treated this as a major Stardust event. And I do think that overall, it was a very fun one, and it was definitely one of the community days that got a lot of players active. And then in May, we started off with a Community Day Classic for another Pokemon that is considered meta-relevant, and this was, of course, Swinub. Regardless if you're going to use it for PvP or PvE, its evolved form Mamoswine is going to be really good as an Ice-type attacker. attacker. So a lot of players were looking forward to this one, especially because at this point we had Shadow Swinub in the game, and to have an event like this to get a bunch of candies and XL candies for evolving those Shadow Swinubs, I think that was really good, and I think a lot of players really enjoyed it. And then following up Swinub, we had Fennekin Community Day. Unfortunately, this Pokemon did not gain any kind of gameplay relevance. Delphox with Blast Burn is not going to be good in any aspect of Pokemon Go compared to the other fire types, so a lot of players just chalked this up as a one and done thing. But I still think it was a fun community day, especially because Fennekin is a starter Pokemon, and naturally starter Pokemon are going to generate a lot of hype. But it's the next community day that I think a lot of players actually cared about, and that was, of course, Axew. This was a Pokemon that a lot of players were looking forward to, especially because some consider it a pseudo-legendary, even though technically it is not. It's a really exciting time whenever a rare Pokemon like Axew gets a community day, and it was definitely one where a lot of players were active, and I think it was a really good time. Now, moving along to July, we had a Community Day Classic for Squirtle. This was a Community Day Classic that I don't think a lot of players actually cared about, but there were some chances for you to get Sunglasses Squirtle, and I think that's always going to be welcome within the Pokemon Go community. That is a shiny that's often one of the most sought after, so seeing that alongside regular Squirtle making a return to Pokemon Go through Community Day Classic, that was actually a very welcome one, and I think a lot of players had a lot of fun with this one, even though Squirtle doesn't evolve into anything that has any kind of gameplay relevance. Although, I hear you in the comments, I know Blastoise is a pretty decent Mega Evolution, especially because of its bulk, but I still think there's better water types with a Mega Evolution, or Primal Reversion in my opinion. But following that up, in the month of July, we had Poliwag Community Day, and I actually thought this was a good one. Considering that the effects of this one Community Day is currently being felt in the Ultra League, I think this one had a lot of gameplay implications. For all the players who were very actively playing during this Community Day, they have a lot of really strong Pokemon right now for the Go Battle League, and that's always going to be welcome, because when it comes to the Go Battle League, one of the things that makes it a lot better is going to be meta diversity, and having community days is a great way for them to introduce that. Next, moving on to the month of August, we had Froakie Community Day, and I think this was the starter community day that a lot of players were looking forward to. Froakie evolves into Greninja, and Greninja is one of the most popular starters in the Pokemon Go community. And this Pokemon received a very decent move, which is of course Hydro Cannon, and that gave it a lot of relevance in PvP. Like, you started to see a lot of Froakies appear in the Great League after this community day, and I think that was very interesting because when it comes to Greninja, there's a lot of people who want to use this Pokemon, but they can't find a reason for you to use this Pokemon, but it received actually two moves this community day. It was Water Shuriken and Hydro Cannon, so I think a lot of players were actually looking forward to this one, and it did not disappoint. And then following up Froakie Community Day, we of course had Charmander Community Day Classic, and this was very interesting because this is the third time we've had Charmander as a community day, and I don't think it's going to be the last time either. Yeah, a lot of players enjoyed this one. I think anytime they bring back Charmander as a community day, it's going to get a lot of players active, especially because there's just so many different community day moves that this Pokemon has received in the past that it's going to be very highly sought after. And then in September, we had Grubbin Community Day, and I think this was a very interesting one because, again, I don't think a lot of players suspected that this Pokemon would ever receive a Community Day, but its evolved forms actually became very relevant within the Go Battle League. Interestingly, it's not even Grubbin's final evolved form, Vikavolt, that was relevant. It was actually its second evolved form, Charjabug. That Pokemon started to make a lot of appearance within the Go Battle League meta, and I do think it's because of this community day. Like, it was a lot more accessible to a lot more players. So yeah, I think it was very interesting in that regard. But next up, we had one of the most hyped up community days, and it was of course Timber. This is a Pokemon that I know a lot of players were looking forward to get a community day, and it did not disappoint. This Pokemon was a lot of fun to collect, so I really hope when it comes to fan-picked community days, Niantic continues to do them, because this was a really good one. Even though Conkeldurr is not ever going to be better than Terrakion, it's still really good that it received a community day. Now moving on into November, we of course had Paldean Wooper and Wooper get a community day, and this was another one of those combo community days, much like Slowpoke at the beginning of this year. I actually really enjoyed this one, and I think Niantic needs to do more of them. Like, anytime they have regional Pokemon, like regional variants of Pokemon, I feel like those Pokemon are good candidates for community days, just like what they did with Paldean Wooper and Galarian Slowpoke. I think it would be extremely interesting if they did something like a Meowth community day in the future, because there's so many different versions of Meowth, and on top of that, it's one of those Pokemon that gives you bonus Stardust. So I think a lot of players would treat it as a Stardust grind if they do not necessarily care about the shinies. It's just a win-win in my opinion. And then next up, we had Community Day Classic for Mareep. This was one that I don't think a lot of players actually cared about, but it's still one that I thought was very important, considering that Ampharos has a lot of implications within the Go Battle League, and it does have a Mega Evolution for PvE content. And then finally, let's move on to the last Community Day, which we just wrapped up, which was December Community Day. I personally really enjoyed it, but I felt like the shiny rate was much lower than previous December community days. Like, typically what they do is they have every single Pokemon from this year's community days spawning in the wild for the entire weekend, and they have a perma boosted rate of 1 in 70. And then within each day of the weekend, they would have the regular community day hours with different bonuses between 2 and 5 p.m. And then they would increase the shiny rate to the normal community day shiny rate during those event hours. But it didn't seem like they did that this year. Like, it still felt like the shiny rate was much lower than it usually is. I don't know, maybe I was just really unlucky, but I didn't get as many shinies as I thought I would this weekend. But still, I thought it was a really good one. I was able to collect a lot of candies for a lot of Pokemon that I wanted to collect candies for, and overall I thought it was really good. That's just my own personal opinion on it. So what are my overall thoughts regarding community days this year? Well, I think Niantic did a really good job picking the right Pokemon. There was a couple of Pokemon that I do think was very forgettable, like Noibat. I don't think anyone cared about that particular one. But yeah, overall, I thought it was really good. Like, there was good starter Pokemon, there was a lot of Pokemon that gained a lot of relevance, and I think it did a lot for the Go Battle League meta, as well as with the raid meta as well. So I think this was a really good year. I'm really hopeful for the year 2024, but it's like I said, this is going to be a big test of a year for Niantic, and I really do hope that when it comes to community days, which in my opinion is kind of like one of the backbones of Pokemon Go, they really do pick the right Pokemon. I really hope they pay attention to the community feedback, and I'm really curious to see what they end up doing, because holy smokes, we have Chansey Community Day in February. That's going to be super interesting. But yeah, in any case, that's going to be it for this video. Now, I would love to know your thoughts regarding every single one of the community days that we had this year down below. Which was a community day that you enjoyed the most? Which was one that you did not care about? Let me know what those were in the comments, and let's have a great discussion. And thank you so much for making it to this point in the video. If you ended up enjoying it and found it to be informative, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if it's your first time here, and don't forget that little bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. And I want to give a quick shout out to all my patrons on Patreon. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support my channel in any way, big or small, then make sure you go and check out the links in the description below. For all my patrons, they get a permanent spot on my in-game friends list. So if you want to interact with me in some way within Pokemon Go, like with remote raids or the friendship system, then make sure you go and check out my Patreon. Also, if you want to support my channel without spending any money, you could always do so by following me on social media. My handle is @Jinsula, and I'm on these following platforms. Alright, and that's going to be it. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch you all later.